This is episode number 27 of the Animals at Home podcast. Welcome to this week's episode of the show. If you are a new listener, welcome. Thank you so much for jumping on an episode this week. If you are someone who's listened to maybe the past 26 episodes, I am super grateful for you guys. Thank you so much for continuing to listen to the show. I've been really blown away at the amount of positive feedback and enthusiasm that I've received from you guys across the world, from listeners from everywhere. That's been fantastic. So if you're enjoying the show, I do really appreciate you jumping on every 2 weeks and listening. The show would be nothing without its listeners, so thank you so much. And of course, I have to send a huge thank you out to all the guests that I've had on the show. Really, my job is simple. I just have to have a conversation with someone who is much smarter than me, and I can just try to hang on as best I can. And I'm super glad that you guys are enjoying that. So thank you so much, and thank you to the guests to continue to have conversations with me. So before we jump on to today's episode, I thought I would just give you guys a little bit of a background to how the show works. So as you know, I only produce a show, or I publish a show every 2 weeks. So the show is never recorded live. I don't do a live show or anything because I do really like to make sure the sound quality is right and whatnot, and any edits that do take place. I don't ever edit what the guests are saying, but I'll take out, small pauses and whatnot just to make it a little bit nicer to listen to. I do only produce a show every 2 weeks is because that's almost the maximum that I'm capable of doing, because I do have another job. I'm a swim coach, so I'm going to spend a lot of time traveling, and I'm at the pool, many hours a week. And each episode for me takes anywhere from 15 to 25 hours to produce. That really depends on the amount of editing that I have to do. Sometimes the editing is super simple and I'll get an episode done in 15 hours. Sometimes there's a little more editing required, so just over 20 to 25 hours. It sounds like, how is it possible that a 60-minute conversation takes that much work? But by the time I contact guests, plan scheduling, send talking points to the guest, do all the research that I want to make sure that I'm going to have a good conversation with this person, I never jump into a conversation without, doing enough research to be comfortable with that person. I, of course, have to edit the sound and the video for YouTube, create thumbnail, write show notes, add a page on the website. The list sort of keeps going on and on and on. So it does add up quite a lot. And by the time at the end of the day, it's nearly a part-time job to produce the show, even once every 2 weeks. So long story short, I do want to start producing more shows, or a higher frequency of shows, because I do have quite a large list of guests sitting on my desk of people that have already agreed to come on the show, people who want to come on the show, people that I really want to have conversations with, but I want to make sure that I'm capable of keeping up with this demand. So at this point, I'm sort of searching and exploring different ways of offsetting some of the work by maybe contracting it out. You can hire people to edit your show and whatnot. So anyway, that's where I'm sitting right now. I'm going to continue to produce shows every 2 weeks, with my goal hopefully going down to every 10 days and then hopefully every 7 days in the future. So that's kind of where I am at this point. So the purpose of this show is really to satisfy my thirst to learn about animals. I wanted to get a degree in zoology when I was a child, and I never ended up doing that. So this is sort of my outlet for that. I never wanted the show to be specifically pinpointed on the reptile hobby specifically, and that won't be the case. Right now, I'm really focused on it because I'm super passionate about the reptile hobby, as many of the listeners are, and I do really want to have as many conversations about improving the hobby as I can. I really want to do that, and I'm going to continue to do that. From time to time, I do kind of go off on tangents and bring experts in from other areas and other animals, and I hope that that's something that you guys are okay with and you want to learn about. I mean, a few months ago, I released the episode with Dr. Kaylee Swift, and we discussed crows, and that totally blew my mind, and that's actually one of the more popular episodes for some reason on this show. So I'm going to continue to do that, bring in other people, but right now, these last few episodes, as well as the next couple episodes into the future, we're really getting down to focusing on how we can improve the well-being of the reptiles and amphibians that we keep in captivity, because that's something I'm just so interested in and I really enjoy chatting about. So before we jump into today's episode, I did want to just announce a really interesting conference that's happening in the United States. So if you do get a chance to go to this, it's at the end of September 27th to 28th. It is being put on by Advancing Herpetological Husbandry, which is a great Facebook group if you're not part of it, but this is a group of people that's really just in line with the same philosophies and ethics that I have and talk about on the show all the time. They're hosting a really interesting international conference in Rodeo, New Mexico, with bringing in a bunch of really interesting speakers. So I'll just list off a few of the speakers that are going to be there. We have Professor Gary Ferguson, who's going to be specifically discussing ultraviolet light and the importance of dietary vitamin D in lizard husbandry. Ari Flagel, who is one of the most prominent bowline python researchers on the planet. He literally wrote a book on the subject, so it's really fascinating to hear him speak. You have Tom Crutchfield, who I don't think needs much of an introduction. Roman Murren and Dr. Francis Baines, who are both really at the cutting edge of UV and talking about light and light cycles and how it affects the health of your animals. And Sam Parrott, who is the creator of Herp HQ, as well as the popular Herp Bites online magazine, which is a fantastic magazine. I've just recently downloaded it on my iPad, and amazing pictures and articles within that. And Sam's also going to be a guest in the future on the show, so he's going to tell us more about the conference. But if you are available at the end of September, September 27th and 28th, and you can make it down to New Mexico, this sounds like it's going to be a great conference. The early bird tickets, I believe, are available to the 31st of July, so you can jump in and get a little bit of a discount now. So go check it out. I will have that in the show notes so you guys can take a look there. Okay, let's jump into today's episode. I wanted to start, before I introduce the guest, to read the final paragraph in a blog post that I wrote for customreptilehabitats.com. You can go find the entire post on their website, but I just wanted to read the very last paragraph that I wrote because I think it really is relevant to the conversation I have with today's guest. Another classic myth thrown around in the hobby is that since we are not dealing with actual wild animals, there is no obligation to care for them that way. While it is technically true, at an obvious level, that captive reptiles are not wild, it is important to understand that these animals are not domesticated either. We owe it to the reptiles we own to provide them with an experience that has elements of what they are genetically predisposed to deal with in the wild. We must allow our reptiles to act out the behaviors they are biologically designed to act out to ensure the greatest potential of well-being. This should be at the core of exotic animal care philosophy. Promoting species-specific behavior through environmental enrichment is more than a mere husbandry recommendation. It is a moral obligation. So obviously I wrote that, so I do truly believe it. I do believe that having our animals act out how they would in the wild is a moral obligation, and we need to learn to progress towards that. Not everybody, you're not going to start out with your first reptile being able to do that. That's why growth and the idea of people in the hobby being allowed to progress is super important. I don't think that someone should go get their first leopard gecko and set up a 6 foot by 6 foot enclosure and have a giant wild natural zoo type setup. But I do think that there should be just the idea that there's steps to climb when you get into the hobby, and the end goal is that naturalistic behavior. And the discussion I had with today's guest really starts to make me, anyway, realize how important it is that progress is happening, because today I talked with Peter Amelia. Peter is the Director of Training and Media at Reptelligence. And Reptelligence is this really interesting online outlet that allows people it exposes them to how to start training your reptiles. And reptile training is not two words that's often put together. And this group of people is doing a fantastic job of showing people that there's a lot more to these animals than we previously thought. So Peter has been working with animals for many, many years, has been using positive reinforcement methods on exotic animals for 15 plus years, and really fascinating conversation. Peter also owns Taking Wing Consulting, which is a company that allows people to interact with Peter and learn how to train their animals and maybe get through some behavioral issues that they might be having with their pets at home. I really enjoyed this conversation. It really opened up my mind to, I think we're probably missing out a lot here, especially with snakes. We're really missing out what their potential could be. So take a listen to the conversation. I will see you on the other side with my sort of closing thoughts. I do think you'll enjoy this episode a lot. Without anything more, here's my conversation with Peter. All right, well, Peter, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. I'm happy to be here.
Well, I'm excited to chat with you. I mean, people who listen to my show know that I advocate for sort of moving away from industrialized reptile care. And I think in a lot of sense, people that hold that thought is more coming from intuition than anything. People just see an animal in a tub and they think, okay, that doesn't seem right. But there's not a lot of science based off it. And then you have the industrialized people who their sort of claim is that these animals are not complicated. They're not capable of complex thought or thinking. And that as long as you provide them with water, food, and heat, they're going to thrive. And I think both groups are not operating in science at all. And it's exciting because now we're getting close. Like reptiles, studying learning in reptiles has not been going on for a long time. It's relatively new. So I'm really looking forward to diving into that with you. But before we do that, I love to really understand how someone got to where they are. So were you sort of destined to work with animals from the day you were born?
Yeah. The story I often tell is, so I was born at home, and there was literally a cat on the back of the midwife while I was being born. Literally. So animals have always been a super huge part of my life.
I think you win for the earliest animal encounter.
Yeah, that was, oh, Ollie. That kitty. Yeah, I always kind of, obviously animals clearly were always like a huge part of my life. Um, and I think it was just kind of like, we just always had animals, right? There wasn't this, and yeah, we were animal lovers, but it wasn't like, I didn't grow up with like, my parents weren't dog trainers or, or avid animal keepers. We just had cats, right? And we had a 50-gallon fish tank when I was growing up, and we would have a hamster, or we'd have a couple budgies or something, like that was just kind of how it rolled. And obviously everyone really loved them. And I think I was kind of the one who was like, no, I need to know more about this. And people often ask me like, well, like, people were like, well, how do you know so much? And how did you learn so much? And I was like, well, I didn't have any friends as a child. And
The animals were your friends.
The animals were my friends, and books. And I would literally, my parents would have to like hide my books so that I would go to sleep, because I would just be reading nonfiction about animals 24/7, right? So it was just kind of this obsession from like really early on. Also, you can probably hear some of my birds in the background.
Yeah, that's okay. It's authentic.
There you go. It's authentic. I'm at home. I'm in my bedroom right now, which is my herp room. So that's where all of my like more quiet creatures are.
Oh, awesome.
But yeah, so there's all that going on. Yeah, but we had we always had animals, and then I kind of started like getting more into it, and I really, in third grade, they brought owls to my classroom. And up until then, my current obsession had been orca whales. And I'm from Seattle, and so orcas are a huge part of our culture here, and kind of like a representation of living next to the Puget Sound, what's left of it. And don't even get me started. And I felt this, like the closest thing I've ever had to like a spiritual experience, where I was like this internal shift from orcas to birds. Like it was just like this, like just completely it was just all at once. And so I went into birds, and I wanted to be a falconer. And so I did all this research, and granted, I was like in third grade, and I was not able to have a falconry license yet. So then I got introduced to parrots. And you don't need a license to have a parrot, although I think that's something worth talking about. Excuse me. Yeah, it just birds became everything to me. I got my first bird, and I just delved in. And like I said, when I was growing up, I had some birds and stuff like that. But I was about to get nitty gritty and figure this out. Like, how do I do this right? And so then just it kind of, birds were the thing, and I got really head over heels into training, and learned the wrong ways to do things, and then learned the right ways to do things, and the science-based ways, the least intrusive positive reinforcement. And yeah, and then when I was 15, I got my first snake.
So in terms of you obviously had this interest in behavior. Did that come pretty soon on with the birds? Obviously, because birds, there's a lot more training to go along with birds. They're very intelligent, and that's sort of kind of part of the package when you get a bird is training. So is that why you were attracted?
Except that it's not.
Oh, I guess
it is super new. Like right behind reptiles is birds. In terms of like, in my opinion, from my experience, like, yeah, people are like learning how to train birds and stuff like that, but there's still this huge concept that birds can just live in a cage 24/7. They don't need to come out. They don't need all this stuff. And even though people will talk about, oh, how smart they are, that doesn't necessarily translate to, I need to like develop a working communicating relationship with this animal.
Right.
And so like even learning about training birds had its like stalls, right? And difficulty there. But I think what the thing about behavior that really was just, I wanted more than what other people seemed to be okay with having with their animal, right? They were okay with either their animal being in the cage almost 24/7, or just kind of having the animal like do whatever they want. And what I noticed a lot was like a lot of complaining about problems.
Right.
Like my bird's chewing on the furniture and doing all this kind of thing. And I got to this point where I was like, there's got to be more, right? There's got to be more layers to this that we can explore. And so that's when I delved into behavior.
So then in terms of learning how to train these animals, is this something that you just learned on your own? Did you go to school to learn animal behavior specifically, or was this just like a self-taught scenario?
Self-researched. Yeah. Self-taught, self-researched mostly. I was going to school, for zoology, and, I dropped out, because I found, a love for circus arts as well. So my day job is I'm a contortion and flexibility and trapeze coach. And I also, perform as well. I'm been super busy right now with a couple of shows that I'm in. And so that kind of derailed that for a while. And I was just kind of maintaining what I was doing with my own animals. And then I like jumped back into the whole training world, in the last few years.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, I've seen photos. You have the most flexible back I've ever seen.
Thank you very much. I worked very hard for that.
Yeah,
that way.
I'm pretty sure that if I did any of those things, I would be in a wheelchair.
Not if you came to my class.
Okay, I'll have to visit you. So that's a really interesting part, because not everybody gets sort of gravitated towards the behavior. So there was obviously some curious part of you that you thought there's more to these, because the thing with the animals is if you do keep them in a cage forever, they do kind of just act like they're dumb and they don't have anything going on up there. You know what I mean?
Right. Totally. And people are the same way.
That's true. Yeah.
You don't give options and choice and control and tools to like express yourself in any number of ways, whether that's through movement or like learning or whatever. Like you're just going to become this like blob of nothing. Right.
So when you got into training animals, was it mostly birds, or you were doing birds and dogs as well?
So mostly birds. It's funny. Dogs are harder for me, actually. A lot of people, like, when they think training their dog to sit down, stay, right? Fetch. Dogs, like, I'm getting much, much better with them now because I live with 3. But like, they're not intuitive for me at all.
Interesting.
Which is super weird, right? Like that's totally like a consistent, like most people like dogs and cats. Yeah. Not even cats, dogs. And for me, they have been such a learning curve. And not that I understood birds overnight, but birds were much more just of a fluid process for me learning about them. Their behavior just made a lot of sense to me. And yeah, I still had to learn, like, sometimes the hard way about like, oh, feathers in this position mean this. But it's just kind of like dogs will look at me and I can tell that they're communicating to me, and I feel terrible because I have no idea what they're saying. And I'm getting much better at it. But it was mostly birds.
So in terms of the type of behavior that you're helping with, is it mostly behavioral things in terms of them? Because I know the things with birds is after 2 or 3 years, they start to go through those teen years and they get a little bit cranky, right? So is it mostly helping people get through those rough years?
It's a lot of different things. I think mostly the direction I would like to see things going in is preventative training as opposed to like corrective training, right? Which is just kind of, for the most part, not the case right now. I do have one client who's really awesome about that. And I've been working with them since their like birds were like chicks, basically. And they're doing really well. And yeah, they still run up with things, but it's less like, my bird's been screaming for 4 years, which is, it's always much easier to deal with that. And I really like teaching the training part as opposed to just the problem solving part. But gotcha. Yeah, it's mostly screaming is a huge one. Hormones is totally another one. Or I don't even like the term hormones because like hormones are happening constantly. So like we talk about like how this animal is being hormonal, and I just don't find that to be a super helpful label. In that it doesn't tell me a whole lot about what's actually going on.
Right.
So I'm like starting to lean towards the word like reproductive cycles, but I'm not totally sure. Anyway, yeah. So it's mostly just kind of helping people fix problems with birds that they have that they're running into, but kind of like it's becoming more and more standard for people to take their puppy to puppy class, right? And I would like to see the bird world move in that direction. Not necessarily like having a bunch of birds in one place, because there's some like biosecurity issues with that. But just in terms of like it becoming more and more clear, when you get a bird, you should learn how to help your bird do this and this and this, right? As opposed to, well, your bird should step up because it's a bird and it's yours.
Right.
We're like, why? Why would you step up?
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
They don't carry each other around. So like, let's think about why that's worth it to them, and then move from there.
Right. It makes sense. So then obviously some of this started transitioning into reptiles. So you said you had some reptiles of your own. So did you start just working with your own reptiles just on a personal level, or how did that, because now you're part of Reptelligence, the group that's sort of, how did that work? Did you kind of start doing it on your own and then go to Reptelligence, or?
So I got my first snake when I was 15, and she's actually right there. Latoa, she's my northern Mexican pine snake. And I had a carpet python for a long time until she passed away, which was awful. So now I have another one. But so I had them, and there was always, I'm sitting here doing all of this like really like positive reinforcement based training, like trying to make everything their choice with all of my birds. And then I would go and I would just pick up my snake, and she, Latoa would flick her tail or like squeeze me kind of hard or whatever. And I just always had this like feeling in the back of my head, like, why are you doing this differently? Like, why? Like, this is not a different animal. I mean, yeah, it doesn't have legs, but like, right? It's like, why do you spend so much time and energy with the birds doing it this way and not with your snakes? And I just ignored that for a really long time. Mostly because I just did not have the tools to do anything about it. I felt like, when in reality, I did have the tools. I was just unsure about how to apply all the tools I had from learning and behavior with other species to snakes, and to reptiles. It's just kind of, they've always been in what like people often call like naturalistic enclosures. Like they had substrate, they had things to climb on, hides, temperature gradients. They didn't have UV because up until then, my understanding was that snakes didn't need it, which I'm shifting on for sure.
Me too, slowly shifting.
Yeah. And so it was just kind of this always in the back of my head. And then I moved out my snake. At this point, I only had Latoa. Latoa was staying with my dad, and then I moved Latoa back in with me. And I was like, you know what? This is dumb. I have to figure something out. Like, I know there's a better way to do this. And so then I met Carrie Kish, who is my other training half. My training other half. She's one of the two people who started Reptelligence. And so now she and I mostly run Retelligence, just the two of us, just based on the amount of time that other admins and all that kind of thing have. So I started like posting on our Facebook group, Reptile Enrichment and Training, and got a few hints and suggestions and helpful things. And all of a sudden I was like, wait, no, I totally have all these tools. I totally know how to do this. This is awesome. And so then Carrie and I started like talking every day. You'd think we're dating. It's ridiculous. And now I'm the director of training and media for Reptelligence, and I have more than just one snake now. And
it's hard to only have one snake.
It is hard to have only one snake. Yeah. So I've got more now, and we actually just moved Carrie is in California, Southern California, and she actually just drove up and dropped off 4 of hers here.
Oh, wow.
So most of Reptelligence is actually in my bedroom at my house.
Very good.
So I like doubled my herp size.
That's awesome. So then, why did she start it? Obviously, she's a behavioralist as well. She's works with training animals. What was her intentions with starting Reptelligence?
Yeah. I can obviously I'm not Carrie, but I can speak to it as much as I know.
Sure.
Basically, it was that she kind of was at the same position where I was in terms of seeing things being handled so carefully and deliberately with some species and not with reptiles, and having like seeing stress behavior ignored in reptiles, and also she was working at zoological facilities, and when they're doing education on snakes and whatnot, what they do is they pick up, and this is and let me be clear, like this is like Carrie and I were both there, right? We both did the same stuff, and that everyone else is doing, and we're just looking for a new and better way to do it, not criminalizing anyone who's doing it the way that they currently are, right? It's just about like, maybe there's a better way of doing this. Okay, yeah, I think there is a better way of doing this. Let's figure out how to like help other people reach that point that we have, and improve the lives of the animals that we care so much about. So I just want to be really clear that there's like, my intention is not to criminalize anyone for the way that they are doing things. It's totally just about like, how can we improve, right?
Exactly.
So one of the standard ways when you go to a zoo or a reptile program or anything like that, one of the ways that it typically happens is they just hold the snake, right? And they'll hold the snake and talk about it for a while. The snake's not really doing a whole lot typically. It, like a ball python or a corn snake or, a boa or something like that. They're just kind of sitting there on the arm being held. And she wanted to see more behavior out of them, right? When you go to a zoo and they're like, they have a hawk, they have the hawk catch something in the air with its feet, right? Demonstrating what a hawk does. Well, why can't we do that with reptiles, right? So one of my favorite things that she and some colleagues did was they built a snake tree. And instead of just holding the snakes, they would create the snakes voluntarily, and then they would take the snakes to the snake tree. And then during the presentation, the snakes would just be climbing around on the snake tree. They would be basking in the sun. They would have a pile of leaves to go and investigate over here. They had a section of the tree that if the snake is on this section, you are allowed to gently touch the snake. But if the snake starts to move up or away to this other section, hands off. So what that did was it became very clear to the snake that, okay, well, when I'm over here, I'm interacted with, and when I'm over here, I'm not. And what they found was that the snake started to spend more and more time in the touching zone voluntarily. They were like, yes, no, I do. Basically saying, yes, no, I do want to be touched right now. The other thing that they were seeing like far more engagement out of the people that were there participating in the educational programs, right? They were actually standing there, watching the snake, as opposed to talking about the snake, touching its tail for 3 seconds, and then moving on to the otter over there, right? They were like, no, this reptile is really cool, which as reptile people, like, we're always kind of fighting this, oh, it's a snake, oh, it's a spider, this, big scary stuff. Like, what an awesome way to increase like some interest in them in a healthy, safe way. So that's where some of the steps that she took and where she saw the need for Reptelligence to happen.
Very good. Yeah, no, that's really neat because, yeah, you're totally right. Most of the time you see a snake and it's just going to be sitting there, and it's very, very boring for a lot of people. And there's nothing cooler than watching a snake climb through a tree. And that's exactly what they're cool. Like, that's what they're designed for. It's so cool. And so now really Reptelligence is a place where people can go and they can learn different methods of training the reptiles. So let's chat about this, because training reptiles is not often two words that are stuck together. At least it's very new. So in terms of the myths with reptiles, like, a lot of people believe that, these are animals that know how to eat and run away, basically, and that's it, and breed. Yeah, exactly, and that's it. Now, I'm guessing that's a myth.
Yeah, totally. So in the behavior analysis world, and behavior has function. Things don't do things for no reason. and consequences affect behavior, right? So if we were looking at an animal who just like, if we were looking at something that just behaves robotically, as a lot of these concepts would suggest, we would see absolutely no variation in behavior. We would only see, we wouldn't have a snake who was, quote unquote, more aggressive than another snake. We wouldn't have a snake that hid more than the others. They would all behave like a robot, right? Consistently. So when I start to see variation in behavior, that tells me that learning is happening. And then there's the whole concept of instinct, right? Well, they instinctually do this, they instinctually do that. Well, to me, that's the same kind of thing, right? Like if instinct influenced all this behavior, even if we had two separate individuals, we put them in the exact same conditions, they should respond the same if they have the same instincts. Well, but we know they don't. If you had ball pythons, let's say you have two ball pythons in one rack and they're kept exactly the same way, their temperature the same, they're fed the same amount, blah, blah. But one, spends more time in its water bowl than the other one, or one, is more likely to strike at you when you pull the tub out, something like that. To me, that tells me that there's learning going on, that there's something beyond just instinct, robotic behavior. There's learning. There's thinking going on.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people think like, oh, you have to be careful not to personify these animals. And that's not at all what you're doing. And no. Because when you say thinking, it's not like they're thinking, I'm going to go do this. It's just behavior that's been reinforced over time.
Right. I'm not saying that they're having existential crises in their child. Right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I mean it in a very like basic sense, and that they're responding to the past experiences.
Right. There's some kind of memory happening.
Totally. And there's debate about how long term that memory is. But at the same time, like, it's like, it's to me, as someone who studies behavior, it's so obvious that they are learning.
Right.
I'm not saying that they are necessarily having, like, thinking about, like, why do I exist? Or, like, what does this all mean? Like, that's not at all what I'm saying. I'm just saying that they respond to stimuli. They learn, and that, like, their past experiences influence their future behaviors.
Right. And so what are some examples of some training that you've done with reptiles?
Yeah. So for me right now, my main focus has just been on with target training in snakes. So basically what targeting means, and as is broadly used in the animal training world, is to orient a body part towards something. So for a bird, that usually means touching its beak to a chopstick. For my goats, I have them, I have goats, by the way. For my goats, I have them touch their nose to a PVC pipe. It's kind of like teaching a dog to sit on a mat. They're just stationing their butt to a mat, right? Or targeting their butt to a mat. So basically what I've been doing, is training my snakes through operant conditioning to orient their body part, in this case their nose or their tongue. I usually select for a tongue flick on an object. I have this blue buoy target thing. There's videos of it on my on Reptelligence, all that kind of thing, of them, Latoa specifically, tongue flicking it, and then she gets reinforced with food.
So can you just walk, because I've seen the videos, it's really interesting. Can you just kind of describe what that is? So you walk up to the cage, you have your buoy on a stick, and then can you take it from there?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically the goal, the end behavior would be, let's say Latoa is on left side of left side of the cage. I put the buoy on the right side of the cage. She moves across the tank, tongue flicks the buoy is removed, she gets food. So basically, the reason I'm teaching targeting is it's like a nice basic behavior to start with, and you can teach a lot of other things from there. It's also a really great way to move her without having to pick her up if that's not something that she particularly is interested in, which in her case, she is not interested in being picked up. And also without having to, use a snake hook or anything else that might be an aversive experience for her to move her. So I can just move her from point A to point B. That means I can get her to this side of the tank, which means I can change the food and water bowl, or not food and water bowl. I can change the water bowl, or I can clean up her most recent poop because she's a colubrid, and and then move her back.
Gotcha. So that is really interesting. So obviously the snake is learning that when she taps or comes up to the buoy, she gets the reward. And I mean, obviously with snakes, it's tricky because you can't, with birds or dogs, you can just give one treat, right? It's like a small treat. And so what do you do for a treat for a snake?
Yeah, that's probably the one of the most difficult things in terms of training snakes. Obviously, they are very efficient creatures, designed to have a meal and have it last for a while, depending on the species and the situation we're talking about. So for her, she also has a history of regurgitating food, and that's also one of the cool things about the story with Latoa is Latoa would hide whenever she saw me. And if I fed her, and she saw me while she was eating, she would immediately regurgitate.
Wow.
Now I have a snake who sees me and comes to the front of the cage and waits patiently for me to get the target stick out.
Wow.
So, and she's not cuddling with me, but I have seen an increase in her welfare, which is my biggest deal, right? She has a normal behavioral repertoire of an animal, and that coincides with what I would consider good welfare. I'm sorry, where was I going before?
Oh, I was asking, what do you use for a treat?
Oh, food, yes. So with her, she gets she gets mice basically, and with her I've been lucky enough that she will actually eat cut up mice pretty well. So I can cut, if she'll eat about 4 adult mice in a session, and I can cut each of those up into, depending on how good my cutting skills or how lazy I'm being, I can get those between 3 and 5 pieces. So that increases my number of repetitions dramatically. And it is one of the more difficult parts of training snakes as opposed to training a dog or a bird. Whereas if you watch me train my macaw, I can get about 40 reinforcers with him in a minute. I can't do that with a snake. And so the smaller pieces mean quicker eating time and more eating with the same amount at the end. Right? Because obviously obesity is something I want to be really, really conscious of, which is unfortunately so prevalent in the reptile community, and also something that I think training enrichment can really have an effect on, which is something I really want to look into. I'm really interested in exercise and ectotherms. So I break those up to her. I recently actually just got some Reptelinks.
I was just going to ask if you've heard of Reptelinks.
Yeah, I actually just got some because I have he'll be a year. He's 11 months tomorrow. My coastal carpet python. And I was really starting to just be kind of frustrated by the fact that he could only eat fuzzies, and the nutritional content of fuzzies is not super is not my jam in terms of what I want him to for a growing snake. He should be having the best nutrition of his life as a baby snake. And so my friend Cassandra suggested Reptilinks, so I got Reptilinks, and that's been working pretty well. So far, all of my snakes have taken them, which is awesome. And also from a standpoint of there's always been something kind of a little bit off about feeding one prey item an animal. It's for its whole life. So I'm really excited about the opportunities that Reptelligence has offered in terms of the amount of variety that I can offer them. So Latoa will also eat Reptelinks.
Has she taken some? Have you been able to get her to take some?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all of my snakes have right now, all 4.
That's awesome. Yeah, for those people who don't know what Reptile Ink is, it's basically like a little snake hot dog almost, and it's a bunch of different prey and all kind of ground up into a sausage. And I don't think we can get them in Canada, so I would be really curious to try them. But obviously, if you're target training, having a bunch of small little Reptile Inks is a lot better than having to slice up mice.
It's nicer, yeah. My suggestion, if you ever are cutting up mice, is like take them out, leave them out of the freezer for like 3 minutes, and then chop them.
Oh, that's smart.
Then they're not going to bleed. They're not gooey, but they're not a rock.
Right.
3 minutes and then go, and then get out of there.
Yeah.
The other thing I really like about actually training the Reptilinks is because trying to, especially in the animal training world, like I want everyone to see the work that we're doing, and seeing cut up healthy little creatures. For some animal trainers, like dog trainers and stuff, it's kind of hard to watch, which I totally recognize. So I'm really excited about the links because I think they like kind of like make it a little bit more palatable.
Totally.
For some people.
Definitely, yeah. It's really interesting because snakes, there's obviously lots of evidence of learning in turtles and lizards. I mean, that's kind of where people started. But snakes are one that people just said there's no learning going on, and there's a lot of like you said, people saying instinctual behaviors, and that's it. So it is interesting that you can get a snake to follow this target. I mean, and I always have hook trained my snakes, which basically I just tap them with a hook before I go in and reach in and grab them. And I always thought I wasn't sure if that was just a myth that I was operating off of, but I've never been struck at ever when I tap them with the hook. So I just assume that over time they're learning that the feeling of the hook against their skin means they're not getting fed, So there's obviously some learning happening there. And
yeah.
Do you have any idea?
When it comes to hook training, I'm not completely sure what the learning process that's going on is. I'm not sure if, and so I've never personally hook trained myself. But when I've seen others, I think sometimes the behavior that I see out of the snake after being tapped, is aversive escape behavior. And so I'm not sure if necessarily the lack of striking is because they are cognizant the food is not coming, or if it's because they're
trying to get away.
Right. So there's definitely learning involved, right?
Yeah.
I'm not sure where that learning is coming from.
So, okay. So let's, I would agree with you that because a lot of times it does kind of look like they wake up and they're like, well, I'm getting out of here. So that's probably true. So if I wanted to change that, if I wanted to have a behavior that wasn't them trying to escape when I had to go pull them out, what are some processes that I could go through?
Yeah. So that's one thing that we're one of our big things, right, is making sure is trying to encourage them to participate in the behavior and participate in the interaction themselves. So for instance, with my Wilma python, with her, I will literally just open up and so Wilma was one of Carrie's snakes. So Carrie's done a lot of work with her. Magnolia. I will just open the enclosure and I will have like a bin or something with something interesting in it. She will climb out on her own. And then once she's about a third of the way out, I put a hand underneath her belly and she just finishes climbing out. So that's her decision, like, right. She just initiated that entire process. All I did was open the cage and then help her once she got to a point where it looked like her behavior was suggesting that she was ready to come all the way out. I think target training actually is a really, really great way to start with that, in terms of initiating that movement forward. I know there's some concern about associating us with food in terms of getting bitten, which I think is totally a valid concern. But I do think that snakes have the ability to discriminate what is and what isn't food. So, for instance, Latoa doesn't really offer food-seeking behavior around me unless she sees a target stick. So it's almost the opposite of hook training,
right?
And I'm presenting something that says, yes, it is now food time, as opposed to that, oh, something happened and now food's not coming. I'm telling her when food is coming. So that's one option. I know some people will always So for like tanks that have sliding doors, they'll always feed out of the left and pick them up out of the right, which is just discriminative learning. Working on words, it's hard. I'm only halfway through my coffee, guys. It's okay. So that's an option. But I think the main thing for me is just trying to make sure that the behavior that I'm getting out of the snake when I am trying to handle them or have them come out is voluntary, and that they're remaining relaxed throughout the process. So I think I'm probably more inclined to just open the enclosure and let them come out on their own, and not necessarily have food involved when it comes to handling.
Oh, that makes sense. And for anyone listening, Carrie has a really great article that I'll put in the show notes about how to assess body language of the snake and how to address stress. And it was really interesting, just like 5 or 6 bullet points under each sort of no stress, moderate stress, high stress. And it can be pretty helpful if you're not familiar with the way a snake behaves.
Yeah, and we're actually working on a webinar video
cool.
of that, and going through, like, looking at videos and like literally walking them through, like, okay, here's what I'm seeing when I see this. And actually, we do need videos of snakes in various states of stress. Behavior,
okay,
of stress. So if you are looking to have videos of snakes who are under stress or not under stress,
send them in.
And send me, so that I can dissect them.
Yeah, I'll make sure to have that all in the show notes so people can just send them right to you, because I think that, we just have to start collecting information.
We don't want to find someone's video and then be like, hey, look, this snake is stressed out. We want someone to like voluntarily be like, hey, I have a stressed out snake.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Hey, just so you know, your snake is horribly stressed right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So one of the things I thought about, I just sort of created this in my mind, was I think, or I don't know, we'll see what you think of this. Because lizards and turtles and crocodilians have legs, they may be easier to train than snakes, because it's almost like snakes learn in a different way because they interact with their environment in a different way. They don't have the ability to manipulate what's around them as effectively as something with legs. So I wondered if maybe that was the leg in the difference between, working with lizard and crocodilian species and snakes.
I think that's a really interesting point. I think that it's probably the most obvious difference between them. Mm-hmm. And from an evolutionary standpoint, if I remember correctly, that snakes evolved post lizards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I mean, that's something to consider. I think that it just looks different.
Right.
I'm not sure that it comes down to smarter or dumber. I think it comes down to more just it looks different.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Exactly.
Because, I've got an Eastern indigo, which, let me tell you, this snake is intense. He is, we call him crow snake, because he, when in the bird world, like, crows are known for being super, super smart, and they just move, they like, literally, indigos move so much like crows. It's ridiculous. He's incredibly smart. And I think that if I had to put him up against my bearded dragon in like a test of wits, not that there would be much value in that, I think Bruce would probably win. So I'm not sure whether it's like a smarter than or a dumber than. I think it's more just like they just behave with their environment.
Yeah, and I that's exactly what I was thinking. I thought that the intelligence in a snake just looks different, and we may not be recognizing it. Mm-hmm. We might not be interpreting what they. So, do you have an idea of where, like, the limits of their intelligence? Like with a bird, for example, like you can push a parrot pretty far down that sort of intellectual train. Do you have any idea where the limits of a reptile would be?
No.
Just got to keep working on it.
I have no idea. Isn't that awesome?
Yeah, that's the best part.
I think it's so cool. It's like this super untapped. And let me say, there has been cognitive research going on and behavioral research in reptiles for quite some time. It's been happening for a while. It just hasn't been gotten the recognition done super widely. So no, I don't really know how far they can go. I have goals. Like goal behaviors that I would like, that I am not sure where I'm going to get there yet, but that I want to at some point. But I think that that's one of the difficulties in evaluating intelligence in animals, is that it's very hard to do fairly. So I don't know if you know Dr. Irene Pepperberg, Alex the African Gray Parrot.
I don't think I'm familiar with it.
You might have seen like a viral video of him at some point. So he was a part of a cognitive study that was pretty groundbreaking, in that he was an incredibly intelligent bird. But one of the things that she said, and he could have conversations and have language and all that kind of thing. Count, colors, size discrimination, whole 9 yards. But one of the things that she said that's always stuck with me is that Alex, who has since passed, all of the studies they ever did with him were not really fair, because they weren't judging him based on bird intelligence. They were judging him based on human intelligence. So I think that's one of the difficulties too, is like, how do we assess the intelligence level of an animal that we have no basis for? Right. So for me, in terms of like my work, I don't know where I could possibly go. But I'm just going to keep going there and maintaining like a positive, like, you know, good welfare with the animals as long as I can. Right.
Totally. Well, that's the exciting part, is we don't know where it is. We might as well just keep trying. And
right, exactly.
I know one of the things that you've used, can you describe what those puzzle feeders, how those work? Because I've seen some really cool videos of your puzzle feeders.
Yeah. So I think actually puzzle feeders are like one of the keys to snake training. And Carrie's done some amazing stuff, specifically with Mags, the Woma. So basically the concept of a puzzle feeder is literally what it sounds like. People are getting them into them with dogs, like the slow feeders and all that kind of thing, and cats as well. Bird people have been doing it for a while, where it's basically just like hiding food and making them figure out how to get to it. So we're also working on, we have so many projects right now, but yeah, it's great. One of the projects is we want to put together like a step-by-step guide how to introduce puzzle feeders to snakes. And so basically the way that I'm currently picturing it, this could change, is you start out with just, I think snakes traditionally have such a low incidence, or like a low incidence of novel things in their environment. They're kept in very, very static environments and enclosures. So I think that slowly introducing new things in a way that is not going to increase stress is really important, and also to diversify the behavior repertoire that they give us. And a great way to do that is puzzle feeders. So when I got my little baby coastal carpet, his name is Mundy. The first thing when I first offered him food, I literally just gave it to him on like a little paper plate. He had never seen the plate before, right? And then it was in like a little cup. Like I use mealworm dishes a lot because I have those everywhere.
Yeah.
And so just like offering different ways of presenting the food. Then I would give it to him in like a little pill bottle, so he had to stick his head all the way inside. Then what I've done with Latoa is I put it in like a little plastic butter container, and then I had the lid just resting on top of it, so she had to push the lid, and then I would cover it more, and then she had to push the lid more, then she had to pop the lid off. I've done like a good size cardboard box, and just put a little hole just big enough for her to get inside of it, and she would sit there for 20 minutes like looking for how to get in, because she could smell that mouse.
Oh yeah.
And so she would spend all that time going in there. So that's kind of basically what puzzle feeders are, is just ways to just encourage them to look for food and extend their feeding their feeding behaviors, because we tend to offer a mouse on a tong and then bam, it's done. And that was their entire feeding experience. When in the wild, we know from research that even ball pythons spend time hunting.
Definitely.
They look for food. They spend huge time budgets on it. And so I think that that's one way that we can increase their welfare and increase, just their behavioral repertoire, is by like increasing that amount of time. And Carrie actually did a bunch of really cool data collection with Mags. And she has like dog food puzzles that Maz would learn how to twist and lift and open to get inside of and get into. And she has a great video of Bruce, the indigo, in a maze.
I've seen that one.
Yeah, and so indigos are they spend most of their time in desert tortoise burrows, and so they would be looking for food inside of those. And so she gave him like a little maze, like a rat tunnel maze kind of thing, and he was just going through it. It's a really intense video to watch. We've used like hamster tubes and hid stuff in there and created dead ends and stuff so that it was like they were hunting. Yeah, it's the ideas are endless. We had someone post on the Reptile Enrichment and Training group. They took a pizza box and made all these little cardboard walls, and the snake had to use that like a maze. So the idea, it's just endless. One of my plans is to, because I have a carpet python, right, and they're semi-arboreal. He's actually very arboreal. His newest enclosure has a hanging hide in it, and that's where he is most of the time. Is actually, I want to hang cups from the roof of the enclosure. And sometimes what I'll even do is I'll actually like have put, like, let's say I have 2 cups that are going in an enclosure. I'll scent one of them with the rat, but put the rat in the other one. So then they get the scent of the one and they go and they smell it and there's no rat in that, and they have to keep looking, right? I have a picture somewhere of Latoa's enclosure. There must have been like 10 boxes in there, and there's a mouse in only one of them. But she spent a bunch of time looking for it, you know, and she spent energy, she exercised, she moved around, right? She was using her brain, she was learning. And the next time I did it, she got there faster.
Well, and that's the thing that I think I'd like people to get out of this conversation is it's not the puzzle feeder, for example. It doesn't look natural, for example. It doesn't look like it's a piece of nature, but it is the behaviors that they would do in nature.
Right.
Like these animals are, like you said, they're going to be hunting, looking for food, they're going to be scavenging, and we're looking at replicating and promoting natural behaviors. That's what this learning is all about, because in the wild, they're perpetually problem solving. Right.
Yeah, no, a Wolma python is not going to find like colored plastic hamster tubes in the wild. Absolutely not. Right. Well, maybe not. I don't know. I don't know what this pollution like is in the Wolma environment. But I'm also not going to be able to go and get a bunch of tunnels out of the outback for mags to, right?
Exactly.
So I'm going to do the best with what I have. And there's also always a safety component, right?
Totally.
So make sure that it's not something that they can ingest. It's not small enough that they can ingest it. I went through multiple targets before I realized because I kept being like, oh, I don't think Latoa can swallow this one. No, she can swallow this one. Oh, no, she can swallow this one. Okay. And so now I got to one that I know she can't swallow. So that's just something also that to me to put in the universe of like, puzzles are awesome. Let's be safe about them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, and I was reading something that Carrie had written, and it's sort of 2 main things had stuck out. One was like even ambush predators. I think she's the example of a rattlesnake, I believe. And these are ambush predators. They're still recorded to moving up to 1,000 feet a day. So it's not like they sit in one spot. There's still movement happening. And even if your puzzles and whatnot is just getting them to move, that's more natural.
Right. Totally. Yeah. And I mean, I think in your podcast with John from Arcadia, I believe, like talking about how, ball pythons just sit and hide 24/7.
They don't.
If you give them a really enriched environment with all sorts of things to do, they don't.
Exactly.
And so I think it's totally that as well, as we can say, this animal just does this. Well, let's see if we can kind of up the ante, right? Like, let's see if we can get them moving around more. And I think that's where the whole obesity thing is going to come in handy too.
Well, yeah. And the other point that Carrie had made, I think it was Carrie, something that I had written was we're actually not, we can't understand the effects of generations and generations of animals that have been completely sedentary, animals that have just not moved their entire life. We keep breeding those. Maybe in 20, 30, 40 generations down the road, we don't know what we're going to be left with in terms of an animal,
Mm-hmm. Have you ever seen WALL-E?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it kind of is that. Yeah. And especially with the obesity and the overfeeding sort of crisis that happens, it'll literally turn into WALL-E, these giant overweight people in chairs.
Yeah, exactly. With like zero bone density and yeah, totally.
And that's the exciting part about this is because even if it's almost like learning that reptiles can learn and they have some memory and there's something going on in the brain is almost like this is going to sound like a totally bizarre analogy, but it's like finding like a single cell fossil on Mars we know that something was there. So it's sort of this, it's, even though it's an insignificant find, it should play a large significance on the way we care for things. Like just knowing that these animals can learn should make us change the way we care for them, because we know that the spark is there, and we can put it out really easily.
Well, and I think that's one of the things that's a little scary about this topic for some people, and for some is that if we operate under the idea that they don't have learning, that they don't require behavioral diversity, that they don't require a varied diet, that they don't require UV, they don't, it makes it much easier to keep them.
True.
To feel good about keeping them and to have a lot of them.
Exactly.
And I think that that's a scary thing sometimes. And I think this learning that's happening, which I'm always in favor of learning. Learning, I think, by definition, also requires like the willingness to change. And I think that's really, really important.
Definitely.
And that, for all of these animals that I care so much about, I mean, I'm looking around this room right now and I'm like, I need these cages 5 times the size they are.
I'm in the same boat. Yeah.
And I'm sitting here, I'm like, well, my dragon was in a 20-gallon when I got him and he's full size. So, what I mean? I got him off of Craigslist and he couldn't turn around. Right. So yeah, he's not in the biggest enclosure, right? But it's an improvement.
Well, and that's really the important, because it kind of gets back to what you had said before. We're not trying to criminalize people's behavior. It is really about just learning and progressing. And as long as we're all in a position where we realize these animals actually require a lot more than we thought 5-10 years ago, and as long as we're willing to slowly upgrade these things, because I'm the same way. I'm like, damn, I want to get like giant enclosures for these guys.
Yeah.
And one day that will be the case. But as long as the progression is happening, that's the point. So it's not about shaming people. It's about opening them up to the idea that, wow, there's actually some really special things that's happening with these animals that we didn't realize before. And we can take our care to another level.
To me, I think it just makes them so much cooler.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Totally.
Like, don't get me wrong. I think a snake sitting there is gorgeous, but like a snake who's moving around and who's like climbing and hunting, and doing all this, I think it's super, super cool. I think it just adds this whole, and obviously I'm a total behavior nerd. I like to see things move, right? And do stuff. So it's not surprising coming from me, I suppose, but I just think it just adds this whole new dimension to what we can do with them, right? And how we can improve their lives. Totally.
And I mean, it allows us to have that connection with nature that you don't get if they're not behaving the way they would in the wild.
Totally.
We get so disconnected from them if they're just in a rack, rather than, having a natural enclosure. Like, it reminds you that this is a piece of nature, and that's really how it should be treated.
Totally. Yeah. And yeah, and I think that, we have a responsibility that, as we have decided that for us to keep them, in our homes, that it's our job now to do the best that we absolutely possibly can for them. And, we're not all going to have zoo-sized enclosures, but that doesn't mean that we can still do a lot.
Exactly. Well, Peter, I really appreciate you taking the hour here. Keep doing what you're doing, because I'm fascinated with the work I'm going to be following along. There's tons of people posting stuff on the Facebook group, so it's really, really interesting. Can you let everybody know?
Post stuff too.
Totally. Oh, yeah. When I got to start my own training, and I got to start posting some stuff.
Totally.
Can you let everybody know where they can find you online?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have my own business, which is Taking Wing Consulting. And so that's where I offer behavioral consultation, either virtual or in person.
Yeah, people can just do Skype behavioral consultations with you. Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I do that for reptiles as well. So for any number of creatures. So I do that. That's on Facebook, Taking Wing Consulting, and also my Instagram is pretty active. And we post lots of articles and all sorts of stuff there as well. And then as far as Reptelligence goes, on Instagram, we are Reptile Intelligence, not Reptelligence. but Reptile Intelligence. We had Reptelligence, and then we forgot the password for the Instagram account.
Oh, yeah.
So now it's Reptile Intelligence on Instagram. And then on Facebook, we are Reptelligence. So just Reptile, TELLIGENCE. And then we have a Facebook group called Reptile Enrichment and Training, which is super awesome. And we would love to have everyone in there and sharing stuff that they've been doing. We do try to keep things really training and enrichment focused. So we don't typically have conversations about husbandry. So when it comes to like questions like, well, how do I get the heat up in this enclosure? We usually will direct questions like that to a different group because we try and stay really focused on just the enrichment and the training part. But obviously, like substrate is totally a part of enrichment. It can totally be part of enrichment. So it's a fine line to walk, but we do try and keep it really focused on training and enrichment. And Carrie Kish, I believe her Facebook is Carrie Kish Animal Trainer. And she's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I'll make sure that's all in the show notes.
Yeah,
and
totally.
It's a really exciting time to be learning about all this. So I really appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, that is the end of today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. I do really hope you enjoyed that episode, and I hope that you got something out of it. Peter, if you're listening to this, thank you so much for joining me. I did really enjoy that conversation, and I do feel like I learned quite a lot from it as well. So here's something to think about. I think the idea of training your snake or training your lizard is quite often frowned upon in the hobby. I think that when people see somebody trying to train their snake, they automatically assume like, oh, this person is anthropomorphizing or personifying their animal and they're trying to get them to do something that they're not actually capable of. That type of attitude does not progress the hobby. For me, even if, and Peter has said it himself, the expectation is not that everybody's going to be target training their snakes. We might have to leave some of that, high functioning training to the people who are, the experts and the animal training experts who are knowledgeable enough to continue with the right practices to make that happen. But here's the thing. If Reptelligence can show and consistently show a species of animal exhibiting capabilities that we did not previously think were possible, that is enough for me to reframe the entire species. This is what I mean. If I can see the potential in an animal that I did not realize before, my entire understanding of that animal must shift. It has to create a moral obligation for me to do better, because even if it's just one specific animal with one excellent animal trainer that's exhibiting those traits, that's enough to show me that, wow, there's something in that species that we didn't realize before, and we have to do a better job caring for them. It doesn't mean everybody has to go and start target training their snakes, but you might want to try that. You might want to try some things. Start paying attention to the animal's behavior closer. See if there's certain things and cues that you can pick up on, because we can learn a lot from this. So again, Peter, thank you so much for joining me. I did really enjoy that. I hope that allows everybody to sort of get the ball rolling with this sort of thing, because you don't see a lot of this on the forefront of the reptile hobby. You don't see a lot of people working with animals in this way, or the reptiles, and especially snakes in this way. So really exciting topic. And I think I will wrap it up there. So if you are enjoying the show, definitely consider going to your Apple podcasting app and giving it a 5-star rating. We're starting to collect a lot of those, so I do really appreciate that. If you want an Animals at Home t-shirt or sweater, you can go to animalsathome.ca/shop, and $5 does get donated to the Amazon Rainforest Conservancy. And don't forget to go check out the Advancing Herpetological Husbandry International Convention. I will put that in the show notes so you can take a look there. And until next time, I will talk to you then.